Time now to find out what the French newspapers made of President Sarkozy's big speech last night in Toulon. And our press reviewer Elena Casas is here with all the details. Hi, Elena.
Hello again, Lorna. Well, as ever, really, how good that speech was depends on what paper you've been reading. They certainly don't agree with one another. Here at Libération, they've got Merkozy, candidate for the French presidency, as a headline. They certainly feel that Sarkozy is starting to give over a bit too much sovereignty to the Germans or to Europe in general. They say inside that he's a dream president for Germany, and even that he sent the speech to Angela Merkel last night before he gave it, although they don't quite say whether she made any corrections. But they do say he didn't manage to strike the right tone at any point during that speech, according to Libération. And they say he's reached a logical impasse, that he's having to go back on a lot of his own policies in order to consolidate France's fiscal and budgetary policy with Germany's more, which means that he's contradicting himself and the things he's been saying for years. And they also say that he's getting very worried about the opposition within his own right-wing party, that chunk of French political opinion that really doesn't want to see any powers handed over to Brussels, and certainly not to Berlin.
But that speech must have gone down well with some people, not least in his own party, at least on the right.
Well, Le Figaro enjoyed it. They've got the new Europe of Sarkozy to get us out of the crisis as a headline, and their editorial here on this front page says that only a more united Europe can save the euro, that countries have to consolidate their fiscal and budgetary policy, otherwise the euro is going to collapse. They say he offered decisive leadership as well, so they hardly seem to have watched the same speech as Libération yesterday. And they do also focus on the attacks he made, or, well, the implicit attacks that he made on the French left and their policy towards Europe. He didn't specifically mention them, of course, because officially he's not yet campaigning. He's not announced that he's standing for next year's presidential election, but they say really it was a campaign speech. He mentioned policies like the left's 35-hour week and their desire to take the French retirement age back down to 60. He had lots of criticism for those policies.
And the business paper Les Echos also seems to think it was something of a campaign speech as well.
Yes, their headline is Sarkozy calls for more effort to face crisis. And inside in their editorial, they say again that he's turned his back on the last 3 years of his policy making, which involved a lot of things like tax cuts for interest groups that supported him. And he's gone for setting out his new line for this presidential election, which is going to be austerity and more austerity. They say it's the beginning of a new French social model, one not focused quite so much on protecting its citizens, but on protecting its bank accounts and reducing the debt as much as possible. They've also analysed some of the language he was using in that speech, in that paper. They say he's certainly trying to stir up the fear a lot. He used the word fear 44 times and crisis 54 times. One word, though, that seems to have disappeared a bit is the word France. It seems to have been replaced by Europe, which he also said 21 times, I think.
Wow, so some good stat analysis there. But the other business paper, La Tribune, they wanted more concrete details, didn't they?
Yes, their headline is a certain blur over Europe today, and they say in their editorial that we didn't really learn from that speech exactly how Sarkozy intends to increase the financial value of the Financial Stability Fund, or what he wants the central bank to do, or how he'd like to reform the Lisbon Treaty. That editorial is headlined Waiting for Merkel. They say the devil is in the details. They're hoping we're going to get those details from her speech later this morning.
And we will, of course, be following that here on France 24. But finally, Le Parisien, they report that Sarkozy isn't being quite as frugal as perhaps his speech might have suggested.
Well, the ruling UMP, his party, certainly aren't being anyway. Apparently, they've just spent 40 million euros on a new building, on a new headquarters for their party here in Paris, which is 5,000 square metres of office space. And even though, of course, that's money that the party's members have donated, the paper Le Parisien still says it's not particularly good publicity to be spending 40 million euros on your own headquarters when the leader of your party is calling on the rest of the French to be more frugal.
Indeed, perhaps not. So thanks very much indeed, Elena, for that quick look through today's French newspaper headlines.